Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I want to welcome you all to the David C. Baum Memorial Lecture on Civil Liberties and Civil Rights. Endowed in 1973 by the family and friends of David Baum in his memory and at his request, this lecture series has served as a testament to the life and work of Professor Baum. Let me just tell you a little bit about this remarkable person. After graduating from Harvard College and Harvard Law School, he clerked for Walter Schaefer of the Illinois Supreme Court and then practiced at Ross, McGowan, Hardee's, and O'Keefe in Chicago before joining the Illinois law faculty in 1963, where he taught until his death, his very premature death 10 years later in 1973. Throughout its history, this lecture series has hosted just countless influential thinkers and scholars addressing really critical legal policy issues of the day. And I think this series really is a fitting memorial to a man whose life and career was marked by unrelenting intellectual vigor and moral commitment. Today's installment is yet another piece of that ongoing tradition in the lecture series and the legacy of Professor Baum himself. Today we are fortunate and pleased to welcome Mitu Gulati, the Per Bowen Professor of Law and John V. R. Ray Research Professor of Law at the University of Virginia School of Law in Charlottesville. Professor Gulati's work focuses on private law, transactional law, contract law, and in particular, sovereign debt restructuring. He explores, among other things, the best ways for countries that are in financial distress to be treated and to be assisted. Mitu joined the UVA Law faculty in 2021 from the Duke Law School, where he had been on the faculty for 15 years or so. And before that, he served on the faculties of UCLA, where he and I just missed each other, and the Georgetown Law Center. He hosts a podcast called Clauses and Controversies, is a contributor to the blog creditslips.org, and serves as regional editor for the journal Capital Markets Law Journal. And his current research obsession, according to him, is searching for landmines in sovereign bonds. He received his master's degree from Yale in 1991, and we actually knew each other when we were much younger. I was a law student at the time, and someone who was very close to both of us connected us. And Mitu and I are probably also not too distantly related because I have a lot of Gulatis on my mom's side of the family. And unfortunately, I haven't had the luck to interact with Mitu a lot over the past few decades, but it's personally very heartening to me that he's with us here because he's always been such a bright, prolific, and positive person. He got his law degree in Harvard after being at Yale in 1994. That reminds me, remember what John Kennedy once said? He was speaking at Yale's graduation, and he received an honorary degree. And he said, now I have the best of both worlds. I have a Harvard education and a Yale degree. With that, let me ask Mitu to come and deliver his remarks, and let's all give him the warm welcome he deserves.
Right. Thank you so much for coming. I'm just curious. I had responsibility for dragooning students into coming to these kinds of lectures a long time ago. And so I spend a lot of time...
Can people hear in the back? You might need to...
No.
Your mic is on.
Oh, my mic might not be on. Oh, I was going to say important stuff. I'm just curious what food works best. I assume we have to bribe you to come to these things. But so at Duke, it was pizza. And there was pizza from a particular place, the meat pizza. But What'd you get today?
They get a box lunch. That's an upgrade.
I hated box lunch because they put kale in box lunches these days. Did you get kale? I would just not go if they give you kale. That's like eating dirt. No, don't agree. All right. I am so grateful to be here for many reasons. I live in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is like Champaign-Urbana, like impossible to get into, impossible to get out of. And I had to literally take 3 flights to get here, and 2 of them got delayed. So the people at the airport were like, you can't make it, why don't you just go home? I'm like, no, I'm going there. Even if I have to walk, I'm going to go there. It doesn't matter. And the reason, I have many reasons for wanting to be here. First, somebody's willing to bribe students to listen to me. I'm going to go there no matter what. It doesn't happen to me very often. But the University of Illinois Law School has been incredibly kind to me over the years. They gave me my first job offers, but one person here was a mentor to me and put up with all of my crappy papers and made them better. I don't know if you've gotten to know him, but Tom Yulin, he really, I would have no legal career but for him. And I'm not the only one in the legal academy who, we would come to Champaign-Urbana if we had an idea that you wanted to make it better. And this is something we all talked about, how we owed Tom so much. So for me, just getting to come back here and have coffee with him and talk about ideas again is, I'm willing to do a lot for that. I'm also, Vic doesn't remember this, but I wouldn't have gone to law school but for him helping me do my application to law school. He doesn't remember. I think that my essay may not have been fully written by me. Oh no, shit, this is recorded, right? I think it's too late for my degree to be withdrawn. But Vic and his brother helped me apply to law school. I wouldn't have gotten in, but also things like clerking. I didn't even know what that was. And at that time, I think, no person of Indian descent, South Asian descent more broadly, had ever clerked on the Supreme Court. Were you the first?
There was the first.
And, you know, you may say that we all sucked until Vic came along. But, you know, there were people like his brother who it was kind of a little bit of an injustice that these jobs would not go to us.
He would agree with you.
Yeah. And Justice Breyer, who was his boss and is the only reason I got my first clerkship, because Justice Breyer was like, I had a Kilamar, so if you could be even 1/10 of him, you should have a job. You know, it was a different world then, and it's sort of bizarre that we get to be here and talk to you together. It was not conceivable, and you have people like Suja. I mean, it is a different world today. So I'm so thrilled to be here. Now, to give you a little sense of what I'm going to talk about, it might help to give you some background on who I am, what I do, what kind of research I do, and hopefully I will tell you a story that will at least add to your boxed lunch quality. Just a little bit. But I have an agenda. I have a reason for wanting to tell this story. I love Tom, I love Suja, I love Vic, and I want to see them, and I want to see other friends like Bob Lawless. But I have an instrumental agenda in wanting to tell this particular story and wanting you, the students, to find it interesting enough to do further work on, and I'll try to explain now. In the context of this, please don't hesitate to ask questions along the way if you have them, because I would be delighted to have them, even though I really do love the sound of my own voice going on and on. So my specialty, as Vic said, is debt. I was in a lot of debt when I was a student, and I was very good at reading the fine print of contracts, as some of you will be, to get out of things like paying my rent. You learn this quickly in first year contracts. You read the contract, and you can figure out how you don't have to pay your rent. It's terrible, but I was poor. And so later, this became my specialty in terms of helping poor countries when they couldn't repay their debts, helping them figure out ways of reducing those obligations. And that's what I have mostly done for the last 2 decades, other than the kinds of research that law schools want you to do. This is the thing that makes it worthwhile for me to go to work every day. So during COVID, when we had to teach on Zoom, my students, it wasn't that fun for them. And it wasn't that fun for me, because I'm used to having students who give me energy and make it fun to go to class, and it's exciting to work on real-world problems. And so I did the thing I never do. I don't believe that classroom is a democracy. No, it's a monarchy. And what I say goes, and everybody has to laugh at my crappy jokes. I mean, that's the best thing about teaching, right? People laugh. My home, nobody laughs. So I asked them, what do you want to work on? And what we usually do in class is we take a country that's in trouble, and we try to figure out how could we help them, and then we produce a report, and then we invite the people from the country to come at the end of the term, and if we have a good enough report, they send their representatives, the IMF will send people, and they listen to us, and it's exciting for the students, and it's exciting for me. If the press picks it up, that's especially exciting. I get to see my students' names in the Financial Times, which is, I promise you, the most exciting thing ever. So I asked the students, what do you want to work on? And they said, you've been working on countries like Greece and Portugal and Italy and Mexico. They're rich countries. I did explain to them that, when you work on Italy, you get to go to Milan. It's kind of fun to do. I'm helping out these people, and I'm in Milan, eating good food. They're like, can we actually help a country that needs help? Like Haiti, really poor. I'm like, do you want to go to Haiti? I told them, kidnap insurance, if you went to Haiti, is so high. The university told me, we don't care about you enough. We're not going to pay for kidnapping insurance. I was also working on Venezuela, then also very high kidnapping insurance. And universities don't like to pay for faculty, to pay for ransom on faculty. Many faculty here probably know this. They won't pay to get you up. You just stay in the pokey. So they wanted to work on Haiti. And the reality of Haiti, I told them the first time they asked me was, they're so poor that nobody even will lend to them. So Haiti didn't really have, to my knowledge, a debt problem. The poorest countries in the world, they can't borrow. But I did some digging because I thought, I gotta keep them paying attention on this crappy Zoom. More and more of them are turning off their cameras and just looking out at a black screen is very depressing for me. And I came across this historical work about the Haitian independence debt of 1825. Now, I won't call on you. How many of you know about the Haitian independence debt of 1825? Okay. From where?
New York Times.
New York Times. Okay, so this is exciting. The New York Times writes about this, but the New York Times does does an article on the Haitian independence debt a couple of years after we start the work on this, and was very proud that they used the work of 4 sets of students in that seminar we had. That's actually one of the things I'm the proudest about. So the Haitian independence debt of 1825, I'm going to tell you the story about that. And maybe if you ask questions, I'll tell you about George Washington's loan in 1791. Anybody know about that? George Washington's loan to the colonists, to the French colonists. Oh, good. Well, not so good if you don't ask me about it, because I'm not going to talk about it unless you ask me about it. But, so this is the negotiation in 1825. I tried to get you some slides. There's fantastic art at the Louvre. I keep telling my dean that I really need to go to Paris to do in-depth research about the art, about the Haitian independence debt. This has not really gone over well with the dean, who says that I can just look at the images of the art online. That's just not enough, right? Deans should subsidize travel to Paris. They're not willing to. All right, so this is what happens. This is the famous negotiation in 1825 when the French come over to negotiate Haiti's independence in 1825. Now let me give you the background. This is work with a number of other scholars. I couldn't have done it on my own. In fact, I'm not really sure how much I contributed, but I have learned over the years to glom on to really smart people. I learned this in law school early, right, from your study group. Find the really smart people and they make you smarter. And then I have continued that tradition all through life. I found Tom. But Kim Oosterlink is a historian, Ugo Panizza, international economist, Mark Weidemeyer, a law professor who does international arbitration, Andrew Hayashi, a tax professor, and I'll try to give you a sense of why we needed this big team in order to even handle a tiny bit of this problem. So, the story goes back to the French Revolution. French Revolution, we have the rights of man in 1789. Right? All law students know about the rights of man. I didn't know shit about the rights of man. I didn't even know what it was until I started working on this, although I think they talked about it at orientation. And what happens in the rights of man in 1789 is the French announce that all people will be free, explicitly saying that the slaves on their plantations in the colonies will be free. This includes Haiti. Haiti is the jewel in the French crown. It is the richest colony that the French have, and the French are very rich at this point. Remember Louis and all his fancy palaces? So everybody's free, 1789. The news takes a while to get to Haiti, which is Saint-Domingue at that time. And the slaves were like, this is great, we're free now. And the plantation owner said, no. We didn't get that memo. You're not free. And it's hard to communicate with France because the revolution is going on, the monarchy is there but not there. And so what ensues is a brutal revolutionary war. And after the monarchy is overthrown, anybody remember who comes into power in France?
I forget his name, but wasn't his nickname the Black Napoleon?
Oh, that's in Haiti, Toussaint Louverture. But you're right, there's Napoleon in France. You have Napoleon in France, and if I tell my French friends Napoleon reinstituted slavery, they're outraged because some of them still worship at the altar of Napoleon. But Napoleon reinstitutes slavery for the colonies. Now, this was not the British did this. This is not completely unusual. And because Haiti was just such a source of riches, they fight a brutal war in order to put down the slave insurrection. 1804, the French are defeated. Napoleon is defeated. Napoleon actually sends his brother. Now it's a combination of factors, but this is, in history, this is the first successful slave revolution. 1804, Haiti declares independence. Now, Haiti becomes independent from the colonial oppressors. Nearby, you have the United States that has become independent from the colonial oppressors. Some might think, without knowing more, that the US would be supportive. I teach at Mr. Jefferson's University. No, not so supportive. Right? Because the US is thriving on slavery, at least the South is. So the US and Great Britain, not any better because they have their colonies, Jamaica right next door, they refuse recognition. Now, Haiti is only surviving because of trade. The lifeblood on Haiti is trade. They have to be able to sell the products. And if nobody will do business with them, they can't function. And Haiti, the situation gets worse and worse. You have these warring clans. Everybody wants to declare themselves emperor. And it's things get more and more horrible. You have this colony that is the richest in the Western Hemisphere. It quickly becomes one of the poorest. I mean, this starts. Now we think of Haiti, our former president called these shithole countries. We think of Haiti as this basket case, but there was a time when it was thriving, and one can draw this history. But France, the US, and Great Britain refuse recognition. All right. Now, France needs money because France did have a revolution. And in that 20 years, Napoleon is gone. In fact, the loss of Haiti is what triggers the Louisiana Purchase, because now Napoleon no longer wants New Orleans, but he wants to invade Europe. So he sells New Orleans and everything else associated with it. Actually, he didn't even have the property right to sell New Orleans. He just said, you can now take it from the Native Americans. That's what they sold. I didn't even know that. I didn't know that the Louisiana Purchase, the US didn't actually buy anything. It just bought the right to oppress more people. But over in France, the monarchy is back. Here's Charles. And Charles, I put this picture up. I don't know if you can see it. Charles perceived himself to be very poor. Poor little Charles. If you look, he doesn't look all that poor. He's got a lot of jewels. But Charles was poor because he cannot control France without pleasing the nobles. And the nobles are pissed off because of the revolution. They had their stuff taken from them in the revolution. So the French crown is busy pleasing the nobles by giving them back the stuff that was taken away. And they had to flee to other parts of Europe and leave their estates. They're very upset. So they had to be essentially paid to be compliant and support the monarchy. And part of this is that they lost their plantations in Saint-Domingue, Haiti. And so Charles has to give them, and they blame the French monarchy for letting go of their plantations. Charles has to give them compensation. Charles hits upon this idea, and it's not just his idea, but it's also the idea of one of the Haitian leaders, Alexander Pétion, that the Haitians should pay for recognition. Now, this is often described as the Haitians paying for independence, but it was really recognition. The French would trade with Haiti, they would recognize them as a nation, and in exchange, they would be paid. Now, Pétion offers us relatively small amount, thinking, we're already independent, you're never coming back here. But Charles wants full compensation. And the deal Charles offers, and at some point it ceases to be a negotiation, is 150 million francs that will go to the former plantation owners, and they calculate the 150 million. Any guesses as to how they calculate it, or memories from the New York Times article? The famous economist Thomas Piketty, he and his students, I mean, it's amazing. Again, it's not Piketty himself, although he is an inspiration. His students go through and do the work of figuring out this calculation, which is amazing. Any guesses?
Determining the value of each slave and then multiplying.
Bingo. It is literally based on the value of the slaves. They calculate this amount, and of course the French government wants stuff for itself, and so they say, well, 50% less in customs duties for France. And France is basically the only country trading with Haiti. So this is going to gut the Haitian economy, and in exchange for this, we will give you recognition. Now, Haiti doesn't have any money. They're completely broke. Nobody's trading with them. At this point, the global coffee prices, which was a crucial product for Haiti, dropped dramatically. So there's no money. But the French say, we have a solution. You don't have any money, we will solve it for you. Any thoughts on how you would solve it? They lend it, yes, yes, yes. The kale must be really good, right? They lend it. They lend it at the highest interest rates anybody could pay in the market. Now we can argue about whether they were fair interest rates or not. They seem rather high, but you know, economists argue about these things as to whether the market would have demanded it or not. But hey, I mean, this was a gargantuan debt that is imposed, and the Haitians don't want to pay. In fact, the French come, Charles sends over negotiating party, but Charles sends over the negotiating party with some support, a flotilla of ships. And they point their guns according to the art that I really need to go to Paris to look at, because otherwise I can't really see properly where the guns were pointing. They're pointing their guns at Port-au-Prince. And so the Haitians initially refuse, and Baron Macau, who now we know, thanks to Thomas Piketty's students who unearthed this, had instructions to fire upon the capital if the Haitians didn't agree with the deal. President Boyer of Haiti, subsequently to the first failure, has a secret conversation with Baron Macau and agrees to everything Charles wants. Now, there are many stories about whether Boyer got a special deal or not, but basically, what we know fairly clearly is with the guns pointing at Port-au-Prince, Haiti agrees to pay the 150 million francs along with this 50% tariff in exchange for being recognized as a nation. Now, I think this is a fascinating story, but you know, from the law student's perspective, what would you want to do immediately? Thinking back to COVID, you're bored out of your minds, you want to do something useful. Nobody else seems to have even really studied this, some obscure historians, but you know, who reads their stuff? What would you want to do as a law student? After you have the kale lunch? Nothing?
Determine whether these laws are still applicable, valid, how they affect modern laws, how
Okay.
courts of
You're a bit too intellectual. I think like my students, they weren't so intellectual.
Ask someone smarter than me to help you.
Yeah, no, we didn't have anybody. They only had me, so that was not going to work.
Check to see if they're still paying.
Okay, so it took them over 100 years to pay. Okay, this is a civil rights lecture. What would you want to do?
Restitution.
Restitution, thank you. Are you still a student?
No.
No, yes, restitution. You want the fucking money back? Oh. Sorry. Maybe it's not recorded. This is crazy. You took our stuff illegally, at least the students assumed it's illegally, give it back. So how do we, to my students, this seems so obvious. You take somebody's stuff, you've got to give it back once we found you took it. And then it's just a matter of figuring out how to get it back. Right? So this, just to give you a sense, this is from the New York Times, from Catherine Porter's piece. Haiti's revenue in 1825 was 5.1 million francs. France asked for 150 million. There's no chance in hell they can pay it back. France gives them the money, but those French banks who are giving them the money can't keep giving them the money. And so there are a series of restructurings, defaults. It just does not work very well. And I'm happy to answer questions about that, but you might not want to. I have all the details. This is part of the research that my team did because we study financial contracts. But I want to go to the stuff that my students were most interested in, which was how do we get the money back? Can we come up with some clever strategy to get the money back? And that's really what I hope to get you interested in thinking about the next steps, because they did a lot of work, students elsewhere have done a lot of work, but there is so much more to be done if you care about this kind of thing. Now, you know already that there are some basic questions that you would ask. And one of the beautiful things about a problem like this is you can't say that it's limited to contracts or civil procedure or international law. Once you're working on something like this, you have to know everything. You have to be a real lawyer. You can't limit yourself to one small sub-area and say, I don't know any of that other stuff. You have to learn everything, which I think, since I don't know any of it, this was kind of cool. I learned it too. So was there illegality at the time? 1825 was a different time. Now we think it's horrible, but step one is, can we create some kind of argument for illegality? Second, and maybe even more difficult, can we find a place that will hear us? Where would we go? And then, basic questions like statute of limitations, or you want to talk about international law, latches, and sovereign immunity. France was just doing stuff as a sovereign. And you can't, it's hard to sue when you have the barrier of sovereign immunity. So very, very basic questions in law. But second and third year law students know enough about this that they can handle it. They're like, this is what we're going to do. So I'll give you a sense of where we are, and then I will stop subjecting you to this soon. So illegality, we had to learn international law of 1825. And they didn't really have a lot of what we think of as law in 1825. In fact, it was mostly, so please forgive me if there are international law scholars here. I'm gonna murder your field. But back then, international law was what a bunch of these king's teachers, philosophers, would say was international law. It was just kind of philosophy. Part of why I know this is my great-grandfather. Most of my family is completely uneducated peasants. But my great-grandfather was a philosophy teacher. And he was a philosophy teacher to some minor king in India. And he also wrote these law books without knowing any law. So you have to go and read these sort of philosophy treatises that are mostly in the form of natural law that we don't really think about now, about what was okay then. And so, can you charge a former colony that has become independent for independence? Well, the philosophy treatises say that you are a nation. Right? My timer thankfully tells me it's soon time to stop. You are a nation if you have control of the territory. Other nations are supposed to recognize you. So was what France did in demanding payment for recognition illegal? According to some of these philosophers, quite possibly yes. Now, the counterpoint to this is that this was done fairly regularly. You would say, yeah, give us this island and then you can be independent. It's what the British did to Mauritius, for example, as late as the 1960s. Give us the island of Diego Garcia, which now the 7th Fleet hangs out at, and then you can be independent. That is relevant for later. Can you use the threat of gunboats? Can you point guns at people and say you have to do what I want? Now that seems kind of like if you took contract law. Anybody in the back row? I know some good Netflix shows going on. No, I would call on you if you were my students. But you won't even look up at me, will you? If I point a gun at you, can I make a contract?
It's duress.
Thank you! See, you could have been in my class! People get paid a lot of money to assert the defense of duress. So, in international law, at that time, there was a defense of duress. Even in 1825, it was thought that you can't have contracts if you point guns at people's heads. Now, the problem was the imperial powers regularly did this. But at least it gives us something to argue about. Now, the argument that some scholars, and I'll tell you this story before wrapping up, thought was the best, was the threat of re-enslavement. So France basically says, and after they fight the brutal war, they say we will re-enslave you if you don't give us this. So the gunboats are there. Now, by 1825, I know this is a little bit hard from an American perspective to think about, given that Civil War, we still had slavery and go in full flow. But by 1825, the world had decided that the slave trade was evil. If you look at the Treaty of Paris and the Treaty of Versailles back around that time, the world had decided that the slave trade was illegal and immoral. They just didn't want to make the slaves free yet. That step took a long time. So if the slave trade was illegal, is the threat of re-enslavement at the time illegal? So this is what we were working with. Plausible. 3 plausible arguments, and now if you're a real lawyer and you're used to going to court, plausibility is all I want. I want to go up there and show my moral outrage. And then I want the New York Times to write about it. And that's what's going to bring France to the negotiating table. They don't care what some piddly judge says. They care about the New York Times or Le Monde. Right? So that's what you want. But a big problem is getting someplace that will listen to you. Now, I'm not going to go into this, but in the case, there are a number of cases where people have figured out in these kinds of reparations type claims how to get into a tribunal. So we spent a lot of time thinking about tribunals, and people who are very good at this do figure out ways to do this. So if you've heard about the litigation against the Swiss banks, the Holocaust litigation, I mean, it's amazing. They had a 0 chance of success at the beginning. Or the Tulsa massacre litigation. 0 chance of success. They lost repeatedly. They finally are succeeding. And I am particularly fond, this is a picture on the Chagos Islands, where Diego Garcia is. Remember I told you the story about how Britain said to Mauritius, you can have your freedom, but we're going to take a bunch of your islands and then we're going to give them to the United States to have a military base there. Some of you been in the military. Is really my students who have been at, anybody has been at Diego Garcia? Nobody? It's really good for scuba diving. So I had a student at Duke who's world-class scuba diver, all because she was Diego Garcia. I don't blame her for that. I would go scuba diving there too if I could. But 4 international tribunals, thanks to the work of the human rights lawyer Philippe Sands, have ruled that the islands were improperly taken. They found a doctrinal basis and a jurisdictional basis to get in and get rulings that these should be given back. Now, the US and the UK are like, yeah, fine, we're not giving it back. But they will. They will. At some point, they will need to assert rule of law in some other setting. And they will need to say that other people need to follow the rule of law. And so I think this is incredibly hopeful if you are thinking about questions like this. Now, I'm going to stop here. One of the questions that my team spent a lot of time on was the question, the size of the liability, unearthing the archival records to figure out exactly, well, you can't really figure out exactly how much is owed, but making the economic arguments for how much it cost Haiti to have to pay this. And a lot of that requires understanding the effect of a large debt on economic growth. That's what my team studies, the effect of a debt trap. So what was the effect, for example, on Haiti as compared to the Dominican Republic, which is basically right there, who did not have this kind of imposition? You will see that the standard of living in the Dominican Republic is about 10 times that of Haiti, and you see that differentiation in the standard of living starting very soon after the imposition of this debt. Of course, there are lots of other bad things that happen in Haiti, like the Duvaliers, so many dictators that our friends at the CIA and the French Secret Service have imposed on many countries, and that caused this too. But our estimates were, the standard estimates that are out there are about 21 to 28 billion, basically adjust for inflation, and our estimates were closer to 200 billion on a conservative basis. And that was when I told you about you told us about the New York Times papers, New York Times giant article about this, the work that my students and my team did, that was the part that we got in the Times about this. I mean, the real work here was done by the historians, but we got a tiny part of publicizing this, and that has now created incentives for a whole bunch of other people to follow up on this work to help Haiti and other countries that suffered similarly. So I'll stop there. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. If you don't have any questions, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for the kale. Thank you. Pizza would have worked better, but kale is healthier. So anyway, yes, please.
Maybe people could walk down to the mics if they have questions so that everyone can hear.
Unless it would make you less likely to ask a question.
So if we do kind of
none.
If we do find out that, or if there is a substantial sum owed, is there any way for Haiti to actually get it back? Because I don't think the U.S. or Great Britain would really kind of go along with this. So is there any leverage Haiti could actually use to effectuate at least some of the reparations?
So, embarrassment is the best leverage. France, so I was at a conference just a couple of days ago at the University of Miami where Catherine Porter, the lead reporter on this story, was one of the speakers. And Catherine was asked by the students at the University of Miami, many of whom are of Haitian descent, what's the effect of your article been in France? And it was translated into French and widely disseminated. And Catherine said, really none, like they don't care. They don't even know there was ever slavery in the French colonies. Now I think, I hate to disagree with Catherine, I work a lot with French economists, and they think this is one of the most embarrassing things in their history. And at least at the intellectual conferences, there is a lot of enthusiasm and willingness to try to provide a remedy. Now, so it is possible, from taking the best of perspectives, that they want to compensate. The question is, how do you compensate? Do you just transfer a lump sum of money? Haitian government, which is a different question, is not asking for this money. They don't want the money almost. If you go to Haiti and go into the government offices in Port-au-Prince, which right now are not functioning, but if you went there and you asked them, any government over the last 2 decades, they would say, no, let's forget about this, which is a different story. But what would you want? Money? So I had a number of Haitian intellectuals come to my seminar to talk about this, and they all say, no, you give it to the government, it's gone. The people would never get it. But the question then is, what should be given? And I think I was born in the Caribbean, which is part of the explanation for why I find this so interesting. I grew up desperate to come to the US to have a better life. Give them visas, give them access to education, give them a thing that everybody can use, that they all want. But there's a criticism of that assertion, which is that you're just doing recolonization, because everybody who's smart in Haiti would have to go to France to get that benefit.
Sorry,
please.
I'm not in law, but I just wondering, could you argue about the original borrower is totally different?
I'm sorry?
The original borrower, the French wanted to lend the money to the government at that time, but now, even geographically, it's the same country.
Yes.
But the regime, the government, the borrower, it's totally different.
Oh, okay.
The current government has the legal responsibilities for something the current government did not borrow.
Okay, so this is actually very good international law. So in international law, and the law of what is called state succession, debts transfer from one government to the other regardless of the regime. So the imperial government in China, those debts transfer to the KMT, and those debts transfer to the communist government in China. Now, the communist government in China refuses to pay the debts of the imperial government and of the KMT, but as a matter of international law, or at least formal international law in the treatises that you would learn, you are obliged to pay. Now, in the French case, the French are not saying we don't have to pay, we are not obliged to pay this. They are just saying you have no basis to get into any court. So, now the one thing happened at one point, I think it was President Hollande, in a moment of weakness, he said, we owe a moral debt to Haiti. Anybody know what that does? My friends in the last row. I used to always sit in the last row. I remember hearing Brian Stevenson give a lecture in law school. It was incredible. I'll never be Brian Stevenson. You don't know who Brian Stevenson is. It was a good movie with him. Any thoughts? What happens when somebody acknowledges a debt? Any of you have like credit card companies calling you all the time saying pay your debts? I told you I was in debt a lot. Credit card companies called me a lot. It restarts the statute of limitations. If you acknowledge, when they call you, if you say, I'm so sorry, I'll try to pay you, starts again. First year civil procedure, you learned this thing. That was the best thing I learned.
Hello. So thank you for coming. I have a friend at UVA and she loves it, and I texted her to ask if she had a class with you, but she hasn't responded yet. But
probably like, oh, he's not on our faculty. He's pretending.
so my question is, clearly public shaming and embarrassment works in many contexts. Indeed, it's been used to topple regimes and force out bad leaders. But when I look at world history, I often find that international embarrassment breeds resentment, whereas internal embarrassment breeds change. So I'm wondering, it's hard for me to envision, perhaps French intellectuals are more honest, but it's hard for me to envision the French people wanting to pay a huge debt from their own tax burden. So I'm wondering, will international embarrassment actually effect change from the French government, or will it have to come from the French people themselves?
So this is a very hard question. And the concrete argument that has been made for why we should forget this all is that France has been one of the leaders over the last half century at least in helping Haiti after the earthquake, after the cholera epidemic. France does help Haiti more than most other nations. And so the argument is, you're just going to create resentment in France if you make them feel bad about some immoral thing that was done 200 years ago. Just shut up and they will continue to help you. So, I mean, I think that is a very valid argument, especially if you think you're going to lose on this argument. And let's just be honest. As a legal case, this is kind of a loser. We're going to lose. The hope is someday we'll get some traction, get some press. Is that enough? But I think these are the hard questions that lawyers have to ask. These are the questions that make law the most fun for me, which is, what is your legal strategy? Do you use the courts when you're going to embarrass the other side? Or do you take their benevolent gifts? It's the kind of strategy that was discussed in the context of Brown v. Board of Education. In the civil rights context, you're thinking about these questions all the time because using the court system is a scorched earth strategy. So other than to say, great question, I don't have a concrete answer about how it's going to affect things. And this is perhaps part of why the Haitian government is not interested in doing this. The people who are doing this are a bunch of human rights lawyers and goody two-shoes like me and my students. But I'm okay with that.
Thank you.
I think we're at the end of our time, so thank you for indulging me.
That was quite wonderful. I think the last set of observations you made are really powerful because you started by talking about the New York Times is what's going to get people to think about this. And then you said, but we got to get into a court. We got to find a court somewhere. And then you said it's a loser of a case. And I'm like, okay, well, you go into court with a case that's, I guess, not quite frivolous, but a loser in order to get more New York Times coverage, in order to get a settlement, and that's part of what lawyers do. And I think that's fair, but it's also fair grounds for a discussion.
Yeah.
With that, let me thank you for really opening our minds. I learned a lot. I knew nothing about any of this stuff, I'll be honest with you. I try to read the New York Times, but there's so much other stuff in the New York Times these days that is catching my interest. So, Mitu, thank you so much for being here.
Thank
I hope we can have you back again soon and often. And let me give you a little bit of gift to remember the other major great public research university that has orange and blue as its colors. And the other
Thank
airport.
you so
There's
much.
no airport that's
Thank you.
as much like Rose Hill.